Hello lovelies, in the last video we explored the fascinating idea that plasma might be alive. We looked at plasma critters, the fact that the sun might be conscious, and even that the Kundalini dust clouds are giant plasma intelligences capable of storing all the information that has ever existed on Earth. Well, today we're diving into some high speculation, though not without cause. We're going to play with the idea that God could be a plasma being, or if not God himself, perhaps one of his deputies. Now, one of the themes that we're talking about in Magical Egypt Season 4 is the idea that what we have interpreted as religion could very well be scientific in nature. So could this be the case here? Let's have a look, shall we? For thousands of years, humans have described encounters with glowing, radiant entities that we could now identify as plasma entities. Mystics, shamans, and philosophers across cultures have recounted visions of luminous beings often interpreted as divine. But it is not just beings in the traditional sense. One of the fascinating ideas that Robert Temple discusses in The New Science of Heaven is that the story of the burning bush could actually be a story about plasma phenomena because the bush appears to burn but isn't consumed, which sounds a lot like how plasma works. Plasma is a charged state of matter that glows when ionized, like the eerie light seen in St. Elmo's fire during storms, or the rare phenomenon of ball lightning, a glowing sphere of plasma that moves unpredictably. And they seem to watch things, as we discussed in the last video. In fact, Robert Temple talks about his run-in with some ball lightning that had its attention fixed upon him. This means the fire described in the Bible could actually be a plasma field surrounding the bush, creating the illusion of flames. What you might not realize is that plasma fields can also produce strong electromagnetic effects that might influence a person's perception, causing feelings of awe, reverence, or even altered states of consciousness. So interesting, eh? Now, in fact, I just saw an article by William Henry where he recounts a story about a 6th century Syrian Gnostic text that suggests the Magi followed a star child, or light being of fire, not just a simple star. The star child led them to a cave where it transformed into various forms, leaving them with star food, an entheogenic substance which is super interesting, and you can read about it below. But the point here is the linkage between the vision and the starfire and plasma. So apparently, the first infancy gospel, or the infancy gospel of Thomas, describes the miraculous swaddling cloth of Jesus, which resisted fire and became a sacred relic. And then was St. Bridget's vision. The infant Jesus radiated immense light, tying to themes of exalted light beings. So it is the garments of lights and fire that caught my eye. Now, William Henry thinks that these phenomena are linked to plasma, but I haven't done my research on this, so this is my disclaimer and read his article. But what if these aren't just spiritual experiences? What if they point to something physical, something scientific? What if the divide between spiritual and scientific, or religious and scientific, is not as vast as it seems? Could it be that the ancient philosophers even, like Aristotle, were hinting at the same truths, a mysterious substance or force bridging the metaphysical and the physical? Aristotle proposed the existence of a fifth element which he called ether, the quintessence. This substance was distinct from the 4 terrestrial elements and was believed to compose the heavenly bodies, stars, planets, and celestial spheres. Unlike the terrestrial elements, ether was considered eternal, unchanging, and perfect. It was associated with circular motion, which Aristotle observed in the heavens. Aether was closely linked to Aristotle's metaphysical ideas of the prime mover, a divine force that set the universe into motion, could Aristotle's ether be our plasma? Well, while plasma is not a direct equivalent to Aristotle's ether, it could be seen as a modern reinterpretation of a universal, dynamic medium connecting and sustaining the cosmos. Plasma fills many roles that Aristotle ascribed to ether, such as its omnipresence in the universe and its integral relationship to celestial phenomena. Okay, so now back to Robert Temple's work. In Robert Temple's A New Science of Heaven, he talks about the Gnostics. The word Gnostic comes from gnosis, which means knowledge, but for the Gnostics, it referred to a special higher kind of knowledge about sacred truths. But anyway, the Gnostics believed that after you died, you went to the kingdom of light, which they described as an area of brilliant, glowing lights. They saw the Father as the highest and most powerful God, and they said his light was brighter than 10,000 times 1,000 suns. Now, one particular set of the Gnostics a couple of thousand years ago were called the Marcosians. The Marcosians maintained that there were two divine entities between the earth and the moon, so huge that they were indescribable and that they were both conscious divine beings. Now, does that remind you of the Kundalini dust clouds? The Marcosians claimed that one of their giant divine entities was called Metatron. And it's really interesting to me about the name Metatron, because in the Kabbalistic tradition, Enoch, who was a prophet or had a special relationship with God, went through an ascension process and actually became the archangel Metatron, a divine intermediary between us and God. Now, Temple points to Jarl Fossum's work on divine intermediaries that highlights the angel of the Lord as a mediator of God's power, and Jewish mystical texts extend this role to Metatron, described as the prince of the countenance, a being of pure light and energy. Again, this sounds like plasma to me. Some traditions even claim Metatron created the physical bodies of humans, which Temple speculates on, while God infused them with spirit. Temple also references the second cloud referred to as Yahul in some traditions. So here we have two divine beings, intermediaries for God, vastly larger than the earth and moon, and intriguingly reminiscent of the Kundalini dust clouds. Now here's where things get fascinating to me. Robert Temple posits that these clouds could hold the accumulated wisdom of all time, knowledge like the incredible insights the ancient Egyptians possessed, the origins of which remain a mystery to us. However, I believe the answer to this mystery of how the Egyptians were so smart might be that they were able to tap into this database of knowledge, these clouds. And the answer of how they did so might lie in the ancient tradition of magic, which we know reached its zenith in ancient Egypt. The particular kind of magic I'm talking about is Theurgy. And to find out more about Theurgy, we will go to my friendly neighborhood theurgist, Dr. Hereward Tilton. Here is what he answered when I asked him, what is magic?
Well, magic for me is, first and foremost, the mysteries of the heavenly ascent. So the ascent to the ethereal spheres, to commune with higher angels and Godhead. Historically, that's really just one particular part of magic. It's quite a specific set of practices which are, they often go by the name of Theurgy, which basically means God work. And their aim is to communicate with, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, God and his angels. So these are higher forces of good in the universe. That's the kind of magic which I study and which interests me. And it interests me because when I was very young, and ever since I was very young, I've been visited by these apparently higher angelic powers, and that always really intrigued me. I thought, what on earth are these beings of light that are coming to me, talking to me?
So please note the being of light here. I've just mentioned Temple's book to Hereward, so I do not know if he has read it yet or has any comment on it, but I sure think it's interesting to me.
These are archaic techniques, but in my own studies, I've found they were still being used in the early modern period by the German nobility, for example, and in the Rosicrucian tradition, which I've been studying, and it's all via altered states of consciousness. Essentially, you're entering a liminal state of consciousness, and you're dealing with liminal forces at the boundary of this world and the next.
Take a note of altered states of consciousness.
One reason why these two paths are so similar and so difficult to distinguish is that you're dealing with the demiurge. And this is where Egypt comes in. Because the demiurge, the creator deity, is supposedly a separate deity in the Hellenistic tradition to the highest deity.
So, demiurge, are we talking intermediary again, perhaps?
Creator deity is closer to this world, which is the world of matter, and so it's in some sense more corrupt than this supposedly higher deity beyond it, which is untouched by matter, which is pure spirit, which is completely transcendent. Now, your ascent through the planetary spheres in the microcosm of the human being, that's the ascent along the neuraxis, following the spinal cord to the brain, through these different spheres or chakras within the body. That ascent is via various spheres associated with particular forms of consciousness to the demiurge. That's the chief of the planetary rulers. The demiurge traditionally occupies the realm of fixed stars. Okay, that's the creator deity associated with the eighth sphere. And actually, the purpose of the Metatronic magic, which I've studied in the Rosicrucian tradition, is to become one with Metatron. That's Enochic magic. Okay, so Enochian form of magic, where you are, in accordance with the biblical template, Enoch becomes Metatron, the angel Metatron.
Okay, so let me just stop for a moment here and point out that if one uses Theurgy and one is able to mind meld with Metatron, possibly otherwise known as the Kundalini clouds, one could have access to all of its information. Now, here is where magical Egypt starts to make sense. In season 1, we look at all the things that the ancients should not have been able to know and do. In season 2, we look at what appears to be a handbook of human consciousness that we see encoded into the art and architecture of ancient Egypt. In season 3, we look at the Kundalini symbolism there and discuss how people who have had Kundalini episodes talk about having downloads or access to information of all kinds that they could possibly want to know. In fact, Chance had one of these, and this was what he says was the impetus for him doing Magical Egypt in the first place. Now, Hereward describes the ascent through the planetary spheres akin to the journey that Kundalini takes up your chakras that allow you to do what? Have this Gnostic experience and access all the information. Or, as Hereward says,
it's the highest level of divinity accessible to humankind. So there's a a form of divinity, a part of divinity which is higher and which is inaccessible. But this is the highest that we can know as humans.
So when you merge your mind with the nous, right, then do you have basically access to all the information that the nous has?
Essentially, yes, that's right. The nous as Metatron. So Metatron, the lesser Yahweh, in the Kabbalistic tradition, is the angel of the countenance, the angel of the face of God. It's that part of God, or that aspect of God, which humans can know, because the higher aspect is beyond all comprehension and beyond our access. Okay, it's not accessible to human beings. But Metatron is the angel of the countenance into which Enoch was angelified when he ascended to the heavens.
So then you can see how this whole thing starts tying together to form a picture that answers one of the central questions about the ancients, which ties together magic, perhaps not in the way that you traditionally think about it, but as a way to achieve altered states of consciousness that allow you to access knowledge and wisdom you would not be able to otherwise, kind of the same way people access it when having a Kundalini incident. So, could God be plasma? Maybe. But for now, let's just contemplate the idea that these clouds could be far more than we ever imagined, and that there are ancient magical practices, or as Chance calls it, the long-lost owner's manual for the human mind encoded into the art and stones of ancient Egypt that could show us the way to tap into their wisdom. Cool, huh? Something to think about. More soon, lovelies.